Hi there, good morning, good evening.
Yeah, hello Aldo, how are you?
How are you? I'm fine, thank you.
Very good.
How's going Copenhagen? Too cold?
Yes, it's good. We're slowly starting to see the spring.
Oh, cool.
And how is Sao Paulo?
Now it's hot. It's the end of summer, no? And the temperature it's near 28 Celsius right now.
That's quite nice.
Yeah, yeah.
I saw on Instagram that you're out cycling yesterday.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But I'm not riding. I'm posting old pictures.
All right, okay.
Old. It's old pictures.
Well, that's good. That's good for some inspiration,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
Good morning from Canada.
Hi.
Good morning,
Hi, good
John.
morning.
So where are you in Canada?
Right in the center of the continent, a place called Rainy River, Ontario.
Wow.
So
it's early morning your time.
well, 8 o'clock.
All right, okay. Excellent. It's good to meet you.
Good to see all you happy folks there. I will turn my video off so that I've got better bandwidth, okay?
That's good.
And you don't have to look at my ugly face that way.
You have a beautiful face.
Okay, here we go.
I was going to say good afternoon from a very sunny England.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have a beautiful shine to your face.
It's the garden south facing, so it's coming in.
Oh, that is fantastic. That's fantastic. You're so we're so delighted to have you with us.
Thank you. This is great.
Good morning from Wisconsin.
Oh, we have Eric as well from Wisconsin.
I'll say hello from Atlantic Canada, Halifax, 10 a.m. here, cold and sunny.
Nova Scotia.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Beautiful place.
Hello, I'm Baba from Tokyo.
Hi, Baba. Good to see you.
How are you? Yeah.
It must be getting quite late in Tokyo.
It's 11 a.m. 11 p.m.
11 p.m. Wow. So
Good
I'm
morning.
trying to figure out if we have our guest here. Oh, we have Stefan as well.
Hello from San Diego, California. It's about 6 a.m. here, so
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
nice to see you.
Are you on the beach?
Oh, I wish, not quite yet.
Hi, this is Christina from Maryland, USA. It's rainy and chilly. And the sign behind me, the virtual screen, we went bicycling and I thought it was a hoot that this place floods all the time at normal high tides, and it says no private property and it's always flooded. So
Oh, so it's a virtual screen. I thought maybe you were actually out in it right now.
no, not today. It's raining today.
So
It's minus 22 in Rainy River, Ontario this morning. After a big melt yesterday, it's back down into the subarctic.
wow, that is freezing cold. So I'm trying to figure out if we have our guest today on the call. So Philippe, if you are there, will you speak up, please? Okay, he's not on yet, Pernilla says. So we'll continue with just greetings. I can see we have Oscar as well from Spain. How are you, Oscar, this morning or this afternoon? Anybody else wants to say hello?
Yeah, this is Guus Mentink from the Netherlands.
Hi, Guus.
Hi. It's pretty nice weather here. It's about 3 p.m., so in the afternoon. And we're having a nice sunshine at the moment.
Ah, fantastic. Good to see you. And Bridget, you're just across the channel.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I just kind of forgot and then suddenly saw it. So that was fortunate. Anyway, hello.
Hello, Bridget.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
And Luc, you were just on briefly.
Yes, hello, Luc Hadane from Belgium. Nice weather here as well. Just finished some working in the garden.
Working or lurking?
Working. The lurking will come after.
Yeah. So while we're waiting for Philippe, I thought maybe we could just run through. I have just a couple of things that we could catch up on while we wait for Philippe to join us from Paris. And the first piece of news is that we have got our first affiliate in the country of Mali in Africa. And there's a really wonderful, dedicated young man who's interested in starting a chapter in Sikasso. And we're working now with the Danish foreign representation in Mali about setting up a program. We're trying to see if we can get the program started. Of course, there are all kinds of challenges trying to get something started in a country in the global south, but it really leads us to basically two things I'd like to mention in that respect. One is that we are developing an open source TriShore program, and essentially what it is, it's to help chapters in countries in the global south to make it easier for them to start a chapter. We've seen that there's a lot of interest, but it's also very difficult to get a good quality TriShore. So the open source is something that initially we're working with an Austrian company called EOS, E-O-O-S, and it's headed by its founder, Hal Grundle, who's also an Ashoka Fellow. And he works with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation about producing these amazing toilets to give sanitation to people in the third world. But he's now also developing a cargo bike to get access to that sort of thing globally as well, on an open source basis, so that you can build and source locally, which is wonderful. We're hoping that the first prototype is going to be produced either in Mali or in Chile, in South America, sometime later this year. And another aspect that might be of interest to some of you, or maybe you have knowledge of it, is that if there are used or inactive TriShores somewhere in your vicinity that you think could be given a new lease of life in new chapters in the global south, then let us know, and we'll make sure that we can connect them up with chapters that are looking for good quality bikes, but not necessarily new ones. So that's one thing. Another one is we've been working every semester for the past 4 years with a team of students from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts, WPI. And we have a team now that is working on a toolkit for starting a chapter. And of course, all of you know full well all the challenges of starting a chapter. Things like maybe giving legal advice or fundraising, or how to do partnerships with care homes and things like that. So they are collecting that toolkit, and they will also be reaching out to a lot of existing chapters to get some feedback on that. And hopefully they'll also collect a roster of advisors who are available for us to call and maybe get involved in setting up a new chapter. Like, for instance, we've had a wonderful pro bono lawyer in Ireland that has spent well over a year helping us set up a charitable organization there. So yeah, they may contact you. And the last thing I wanted to mention to you before we get started is very exciting. It's our good friend and affiliate in Santa Barbara in California, John Buettner, who has been invited into a conversation with TEDx Santa Barbara this coming Wednesday Pacific time. And if you go into the Facebook stories, there'll be a registration. We can maybe share it in the link in the chat here on the Zoom call. But he's a remarkable person, and he also has a really beautiful TED talk that he did some years ago as well about cycling with kids across America. Very touching story. So I also recommend that you sign up for that if you have the time. It's in the afternoon Pacific time, so it's a little bit tricky for people in Europe, but maybe in other places around the world you have time to spend listening to that. All right. Pernilla, do we now have Philippe on the call? Maybe.
I am trying to reach out to him because I think he might have trouble getting into the Zoom call.
All right.
So maybe we could, we were anyway planning to hear about, what was going on around, with you guys and what was going on in your communities. So maybe that would be a good time while I try to reach out to Philippe.
I think that's a wonderful idea. Yeah, if that's usually something that we do at the end of the conversation here. It's that we all engage in a conversation, and of course, with the number of participants and the limited time, we probably can't really all talk, but we'd like you to share as much as you would like. If you have any particular challenges that you have, maybe you want some inspiration or some input from your colleagues, then please go ahead. I think now is a good time for that.
This is John Elliott from Rainy River, Ontario. I got interested in this about 3 years ago, and 2 years ago finally decided that I would buy a tri-shot to try and set this up. And finally did get everything set up and got it working, and then COVID hit, so it's basically sitting there. It was a bit of a challenge because you're in isolation, but we did get a unit, put it together with my granddaughter, and made a cooperative arrangement with the local care home here that they would provide the insurance for us. And the local Lions Club, I took it to them and they paid for the unit, sponsored it. So that's where we're at, just waiting for some vaccinations so we can get out there and go. Thank you.
I think a lot of people on this call may have some of the same experience as well. Anybody like to comment on John's words? Or any other questions? Ideas, maybe? Things that you're curious about?
We just got our first 2 bikes here in the beginning of the month, and we've got a trailer to haul them around. So we're getting excited to getting started up here in Wisconsin. And we've got things lined up, and now we just have to get the volunteer pilots. I've got about 18 folks that have volunteered. Whether or not they'll all become trained, I don't know yet, but we're excited about that. And we have the plans in process now to, even with COVID, we're planning on providing rides starting in the early spring here.
So when you say early spring, Eric, when is that? Because I know Wisconsin is brutally
August,
cold.
September. No, we're planning on starting in April, May.
Yeah.
Depending on when we have all the things lined up. So.
And there's no snow on the ground.
Well, maybe you just need some snow chains or studded tires, right?
There we go.
How's it going in Scotland, Christine? You're muted, Christine. You are muted. Can you unmute yourself? There you go. Yeah.
I've done it. Yeah. Sorry, I was waiting on you unmuting me. I thought you could do. You were in the control panel there, Ollie. Yeah, it's going well. We're just waiting patiently on the government allowing us the freedom to go back out because we had to suspend all the rides since Christmas. The only rides that are taking place are people just kind of firing up the batteries just to keep them just to keep them fired up whilst we're patiently waiting. But there's a huge response for new chapters starting, so we've got an unprecedented number of people all waiting to lined up, getting ready to go. So one other thing I wanted to, since everybody's here in the audience, I love looking at all the Instagram messages and all the Facebook messages, but sometimes it's difficult to know which country people's from the from the title of the Instagram post or the message. And it's one of the reasons that we have Cycling Without Age Scotland as our first kind of tag on all the posts. So if that could be addressed in any way, it would be great, because you then know what country you're looking at. It's just a suggestion. I mean, it would be nice to know who we're looking. It's great to see here too, so many people from so many countries. It's fabulous. So
yeah, that's a really good idea, and hereby passed on to everybody on the call and those who are going to be watching the call later on. We're going to be putting a link to the call on the hood, so that those who couldn't make it today, they will be able to go and watch it, or you can rewatch it as well. And actually, Christine, you know that Des from England is looking this summer, obviously all the restrictions permitting, to ride a trishaw from the very north of Scotland all the way down to Land's End in the south.
Yeah, we've had a number of Zoom calls with Des actually, and helping him and guide him on the preparation for that. So we will be involved in that a lot with him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of considerations because there's some challenging routes, but and he's told us that he's getting a specially designed bike with a belt drive from you, which is great news. So it's shaping up pretty well. So we'll keep everybody posted in that. And Bridget obviously knows, I'm quite sure, everything that's going on. It's great to see all of you here. I think Clara wanted to say something. Clara had her hand up there, didn't you, Clara?
Yeah, sorry, I need to go and see the rugby in a minute because Ireland is playing Italy shortly. So please forgive me. I will watch the recording later, folks. But before I go, I wanted to say a couple of things about Ireland. We've just been granted charity status. It's been a long haul, but finally Cycling Without Age Ireland is now a registered charity. So thank you all. It's been a battle, and I got very good help from pro bono from a big lawyering firm in Dublin. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in the last month or so, I've had a number of inquiries from local authorities in Ireland. So these are the public authorities that fund the counties in Ireland, and they are now wanting to sponsor trishaws, and they want particularly to sponsor community-based ones. So rather than going into care homes, they actually are interested in having community-based trishaws. We have some of them in Ireland, very few. But it's going to be very exciting over the next few months to get those in and get them up and running. So I'm looking forward to that. My own local county, which is Dunleary, is planning to get 2 trishaws, and I'll be looking after pilot training, and we'll organise a system of pilots. So it's a bit of a change from up to now. All the 30+ trishaws have been in care homes, bar 1 or 2, but now we'll be working in a slightly different format. So it'll be interesting to fill you in on that maybe on our next call and see how that's going. So nice to meet you all, and please forgive me while I go and watch rugby.
Clara, it's good to know that you're thinking about community-based trishaws, because actually probably we're the flip side. Most of us are in community bases rather than in care homes. So we can certainly help you on that. So we'll
Thank you. Yeah, we will connect shortly and closely. We'll work on that, Christine. Thanks, Mel.
Absolutely, yeah.
We are still trying to reach Philippe. I think he's having. Did any of you have any difficulties registering and accessing this meeting?
No, none at all. No.
Okay, so Pernilla is on the phone with him. We're trying to figure out what he's doing wrong, or if there is any technical glips there. But we'll just continue to entertain ourselves. I'd love to hear also if anybody else have some interesting experiences or ideas.
I do have a question, Ole.
Yeah.
This is about the new planning system that's been worked on in Australia, as you have been telling a couple of colleagues of mine in the Netherlands. It's called Recify, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Do you know if we can get in contact with the guys there doing the development of the system?
Yeah, it's a system. Rustify is an Australian system that was developed in collaboration with CWA Australia and Singapore, and they're both using it at the moment. And it's a standard system that you can use for coordinating volunteering activities. I believe that I passed on the details of two of the founders of Rustify to some of the people in Holland. I think Nina got it and Albert. So they may already be in contact with the people at Rustify. And just for everybody else, if you're interested, there are a number of different options. One is Rustify, which they have a bespoke version that can be used with Cycling Without Age. I'm not exactly sure what the cost is, but it's not very expensive, and it's a well-proved and tested system for organizing rides. There is another one that is called Go, that's been working for the last 5 years in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Germany, and that has been revamped and completely rebuilt from scratch, and it's now been relaunched in Denmark. I believe that is a little bit more expensive, but if you want to know more about that, then Søren Steffensen, who is one of the country leads in Denmark, he knows a lot about that system as well. He's been part of developing it, and it's a really good sound system that is completely dedicated to Cycling Without Age. So there are these two options, and I know that there are lots and lots of other ways that people are coordinating rides out there. And maybe at some point we could have a specific call to talk about these different systems, or people can ask questions to the developers and some of those people who are knowledgeable about those systems.
Okay, thank you.
So now I think we have, is he on? Are you on, Philippe? Okay.
I am on. I'm terribly sorry. It is having entered my second half century of life, I find that technology is starting to hate me more and more.
That's okay, Philippe. I see now that you are called Pernille, which is fine as well.
Yeah. I think it's a better name, don't you think?
It suits you. And actually, with that virtual background, it looks like you have some sort of a long hair at the back.
I wish that were the case. My hair is quite short. It was quite long at the beginning of the lockdown. I will actually turn off my background so that you can see my non-corporate identity. Hold on a sec. I'm very happy to see all of you. I'm terribly excited to have some time to talk with yourselves, with Ole and with Pernille about the work that you're doing and all the challenges that we are facing just in our everyday life, but also in our everyday life since the advent of COVID-19.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to have you today, Philippe, and we've just spent some time just catching up with each other on the call, and we had a call earlier on this week, and we talked about essentially what we're going to be talking about today in CWA conversations, and we call it a giant playground, and we'll be talking about activism and purpose and empowerment and the city of the future and how we fit in. Many of you have already submitted some questions, so if I run out of questions, you are more than welcome to just join me in asking questions to Philippe. And today we have, I can see already, we've been around, we have affiliates and we have pilots and we have staff and elders and just really a broad section of partners that are all operating on a national and regional level from all around the world. We have all the way from Tokyo in one end to San Diego in the other end. Just on a practical note, if you when you don't speak, just put your mic on mute, and then unless you are called Pernille, then you change your name to your own name and your country. And Philippe, you can remain called Pernille if you want.
I will rename myself. It's sad, but this way at least people know won't attribute anything that I say to her if it's really damaging.
So welcome to you, Philippe. And when you're not chatting to us from your awesome basement outside of Paris,
welcome to my basement,
or walking your dog or riding your bike, you're an advisor for innovation and foresight for the International Transport Forum at the OECD. Now, that sounds like a dream job to me, in a dream city. Is that how you feel?
It's actually a job that I fell into not by choice, but by necessity. And the necessity was that a lot of our member governments, so we work for national governments around the world in 64 different countries. And a lot of our national governments, but subnational governments as well, regions, cities, were being confronted with a lot of changes and a lot of future changes they knew were coming down the pipeline, mainly technology-based, that had the potential to reshape cities, reshape the way in which transport and mobility are delivered. And they turned to us for advice on how to manage that change and how to anticipate those changes. And one of the things that I felt, and one of the things that drew me to this job, is that too often people believe that the responses to technology and the uptake of technology is something that is unidirectional and always good. And a second thing is that people often in this context believe that the responses to our problems and to the challenges that we face are always technologically based. And so there's a lot of that kind of bias in thinking about the future and thinking about innovation. And I wanted to make sure that when we provide advice to our member governments, it's based on first principles. And those first principles have to do with what is good for us as humans, what is good for cities as these complex ecosystems that aren't technological constructs, they're really human, meshed with technology, meshed with the built environment. And I wanted to make sure that we were providing advice that didn't overly simplify these responses to the automated car, to the Internet of Things, to the point where those responses push the humans to the edge and push the humans out of the picture, push us out of the picture. And so when you say it's a dream job, in fact, it's sometimes frustrating because you're always trying to come back and tell people, don't forget this is for people. Don't forget that cities aren't machines. Don't forget that these machines that we've accepted into cities only provide some services, but they're not the panacea to addressing all of the things that we need to deliver as human societies to our members. Yes. And so it's a little complicated, but yeah, it's interesting. But I feel like I'm always going up to the ramparts. Yeah.
But hey, you're originally from Tennessee in rural southern USA.
I am from Tennessee.
Tell us how you ended up in France and living a life without ever having had a driver's license.
I am from Tennessee. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. Never ended up speaking like that though. My family was a mix of a father, an American who was a professor of French, and a French mother. And every summer we'd go to France, and people have different affinities for different cultures. I certainly picked up an affinity for being in Europe and being with my French family. And that meant that when I reached my teenage years, I wanted to go back to France every summer. That, of course, wasn't possible at that time because I was having to fly as a full paid adult. And so I had a choice, like many people in my age, 15, 16, in the US, and that was to either invest myself in obtaining a car, driving a car, or take that money that I would, or the money that my parents would give me, or the money that I was going to be working for, and use that to travel back to France every summer. So I took that second choice. And again, it wasn't out of a rejection of the car. It was actually more out of an attraction for a different type of culture and lifestyle that I appreciated. That said, that choice meant that I grew up all the way through my late 20s in the United States without ever owning a car, without ever getting a driver's license. And that gave me a very different perspective on cities. It also gave me a little different perspective on how living in those cities without access to an automobile is both rewarding, terribly rewarding, but also quite complicated. And so that was one of the things when I came back to Europe, because we don't just work in North America and Europe, we work all around the world. I can see cities that are at the cusp of becoming even more engineered for automobility, that have this option. Which way do we want to develop, and do we want to develop to facilitate an entire ecosystem around the car, or do we want to develop in a way that facilitates an entire ecosystem around people moving in different ways? And that's where I've taken that sort of hard wiring of what I experienced as a child growing up and bring it to my work, because I do think the latter, that question of how do we engineer cities to allow all kinds of movement, is the right direction.
We've all heard that cities have used the pandemic to rewire themselves and put more focus on active transportation and on bikes. I'm curious to know if this is a real thing, or is it mainly hype?
It's a real thing. Now, like with a lot of things, I wonder about the staying power and of the kinds of changes. So there's two things: the staying power in the mental changes, the cognitive shift that has occurred both for people living in cities, but also for people who are elected officials in cities. I think that for some, it has been a moment where the lights went on and they saw that they could do things a lot faster than they thought they could. They can deploy things in ways that they never thought they could before. And that not only that, but they could get some traction on the ground from their constituents for doing that. And so that meant that a lot of cities, or several cities that had longer term plans for developing cycling or light mobility infrastructure, were able to do that almost overnight. And those ended up being quite popular. They're not popular everywhere. And there's been of course, you're talking about a system where there are a lot of people who've designed their entire lives, not out of choice, but out of necessity, around the car. And so, there's always going to be friction in that kind of system change. And we can look to some cities that have managed that friction better, and other cities where that friction has been more difficult to manage. So I think that over time, like everything, there will be cities that will stay on this trajectory and continue on this trajectory. And there are some cities where this moment in time will close up and not emerge until the next crisis. So,
I love to identify and talk about the bright spots. So you say that some have managed this friction well and some not so well. Some of the ones who've managed well, can you give one really good example and maybe explain what has been the reason for that success?
I think the cities that have managed the best are the cities that already had plans on the books and already had a vision to what they wanted the city to look like. And that was a longer vision plan. And so the cities like that are going to include Milan, Brussels, Paris to a certain extent. I'm trying to think of a North American example. Oakland, California.
Annie is asking if London is doing well.
I think London was actually on a trajectory doing well beforehand, but London is one of those places where there's been a lot of pushback as well. And some of the cycling facilities that were developed on the west side have already been clawed back because the communities, the extremely wealthy communities where some of those facilities are developed, pushed back because their way of getting around was, even with a city as well supported by public transport as London, was by cars. And so ironically, even though the sort of underlying momentum is still there in London, I wouldn't say that London is one of the ones that has really emerged from the top, partly because of tensions between the national government and local government, even though the national government had a very strong position saying we need to put in place these changes. The political relationship between London and the national government is a complicated one. I think that in terms of cities that were able to leverage existing plans going forward, Lima, Peru is one, Bogota in Colombia is another one. Lima had a plan for about 300 kilometers of cycleways and light mobility infrastructure they had in plan. And in about 3 months, they implemented, with temporary measures, they implemented about 2/3 of that. And this was a 10-year plan. So they were really rapidly able to do that. The city of Paris closed down its central artery through the heart of Paris, the Rue de Rivoli, to cars, except for taxis and for deliveries. And that was, okay, it's not from a network perspective terribly important, but from the meaning behind that, the iconic status of closing down that roadway to cars in the heart of Paris is a really large signal to the rest of the community. This is what we want. This is what Parisians want for central Paris. So I think there are some really good stories coming out of there. But I think going back to North America, I was struggling to find a city that is really moves forward. I think the model there is slightly different. The car dependency is slightly more entrenched. But I would say Oakland is one of those that very early on developed a whole network of slow streets, and that saw that this was a good way to create community space for inhabitants that did not exist before. And it wasn't just mobility space, it was really community space.
Yeah. So we actually, just moving on from that, you know, we have a lot of volunteers and chapter leaders from around the world on this call, and I count myself in those ranks as well. And we encounter a lot of challenges as we go about setting up a new chapter. It could be related to what we just talked about, and running the chapter as well, and expanding our footprint in the local community. And that could be anything from red tape to downright opposition from, I suppose, well-meaning but uninformed city administrators. And you advise local and national governments in many different countries. Why is it that what we do is important? And can you give us some advice on how to tackle local governments as we go about implementing our programs?
Why is it that what you do is important? That's a hard question for me to answer, because it is so over the top evident that what you do is important that it's hard to articulate. It seems like breathing is important, or like eating 3 meals a day is important. You know, being able to get people out who otherwise do not have that possibility into the city, cycling in this case, but it could even be walking, no matter what, interacting with other people. All of those are really fundamentally important, especially at any stage in our life, but especially very in early years and in very late years, because those are the times in which those opportunities are closed out because of the physical barriers that we face. So why would it be that authorities would not see that this is important? Well, part of it is because it is something that they have not been conditioned to understand yet. And so while they may be quite willing to set aside multi-million euros into elder care facilities and structures that they understand, they don't understand this sort of hybrid, which is moving the facility, moving the person, not the person to the facility, but making the facility actually the city. And I think that's something that, you know, they're not really structured for. There's not a department for that. There's not an allocation in their budget for that. So there's just these issues with misalignment between the way in which they're geared to work and the way in which they have to work here. But I think in overcoming that, it's always helpful to try to think of what common ground exists, and working your way up that chain of what can we agree on. And with the city authority. And I think no city would say we do not want to care for our elders, or we do not want to provide healthy opportunities for our population. It's somewhere down that line that breaks off between what their vision is and what our vision is. And I think it's important to identify where that break takes place, because then you can say, okay, we can walk all the way here to this point. And now at this point, you say we have to do it one way and we say we have to do it another way. Is that really a barrier? Can we not think of a way to more creatively ensure that what we both want is going to be delivered? And so it's partly activism. Activism is also education. Activism is also creating a vision of what an alternative reality would be like. And that, I think, is again going back to why what you do is important, because you're in their faces. You're in the streets. You are a visible icon for how the system can function better. And you can't think of a better way to advertise that than to make sure that you are out in the streets and you are making sure that these people do get the opportunity to free themselves of the confines of these elder care facilities.
Speaking of activism, when we spoke a few days ago, you mentioned that without us doing activism, there'll be others moving in to fill that void, like the corporates, for instance. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Activism is just another way of saying that you are presenting your views in order to enforce or to initiate change. And we're doing it for one reason, because we have a shared vision of what makes people better and what makes cities better and what makes the interaction between cities and humans better. There are other people who have other, they may not disagree with that, but they also have other motivations, and that might be to sell buildings or to sell equipment or to rezone parts of the city that might support whatever vision they have. They're also activists, they're lobbyists, but they're activists. They're activists for a cause. So when you think of the act of activism, you should put yourself on a continuum with all those people who are providing advice and sometimes free lunches to elected decision makers in order to modify their set of choices or to influence their set of choices. There is no, I don't believe there is a hierarchy between these. There is no difference in terms of how much voice you should have versus another actor. And so you should never feel self-aware or maybe not at your place when you are asking for change. It's the only way that the only way that these governments will change is by having people come to them and indicate, as you do, that this is the change that you want and this is why you want this.
Yeah. So I want to I want to dive a little bit further into some of the concrete areas. And in Cycling Without Age, we work to help create better cities and build better lives. You talk about the role of the curb. Can you explain what you mean by the curb and why it's important?
Yeah, the curb, CURB in the US, KERB in the UK. The curb is well, basically it's that little concrete lip, the interface between the non-mobility part of public space and the mobility part of public space, the barrier between the road and the pavement or the sidewalk, depending on if you're in the UK or in the US. It's important because it's where the only value that, the only immediate value from mobility, other than the value that you derive just from moving, takes place. Mobility is a kind of weird concept because it only delivers value. The act of moving isn't what creates most of the value, except for cycling. I'll come back to that. But it's really the moment at which you stop and get out of a vehicle or get off of a vehicle and then start interacting with other activities with people. And that takes place at the curb in most cases. One of the things that we've seen is that going forward, our use of the curb has been basically to store, well, in many cases, to store private property, the property that vehicle owners, have when they park their cars there. That's not necessarily the best use of that space, especially in dense urban areas. There are better uses of that space, and one of those uses, of course, is to store smaller pieces of private property, bikes, scooters, whatever. But another thing is to use those spaces as pick-up and drop-off zones, because you will always have pressure and needs to use other vehicles than those that are just powered by humans in cities. Those, of course, include buses, they include taxis, they might include the type of ride-sourcing vehicles that we've seen. But they need access to the curb for pick-up and drop-off, just as freight. And I think one of the things going forward in the city, we've had this vision, and you all have seen it, and we almost have a blindness to this. Go to any city, and I've done this with people. I've asked them in the streets of Paris, for example, what do you see? And so they tell me about the buildings, they tell me about the planters, they tell me about the sky, whatever they see. No one has ever told me, oh, I see a wall of steel on either side of the street, and that wall of steel is the parked cars, because we become immune to that. So part of rethinking the city is rethinking that wall of steel. How might we remove that, and to what better uses can we put that space? And that's why we've been focusing on trying to imagine what curb use in the future should look like. One last thing on that, actually two last things. On the curb, I think that the differentiation between the curb mobility space and non-mobility space is important when you have larger vehicles that are going faster. So this can be buses, vans, cars, etc. That difference becomes less important when you have a real mix of lighter vehicles that are going slower, including pedestrians. And I think in many parts of our city, we don't need curbs because we don't need that separation amongst light mobility vehicles and pedestrians, but we don't design our public space for that. We design mobility space and non-mobility space. And I think there's a lot more that we can do in trying to mix those two under both an architecture and rules that manage the maximum speeds that you want to see in those areas. The last thing I said is, I said that there's no value derived from mobility. It's only when you arrive at a destination that you get that value. And in fact, as an economist, we measure what that value is, the monetized value of access. That's not true for cycling, and it's not true for walking, because the act of getting there derives value individually, of course, mentally, cognitively, but from a health perspective. And so cycling and other forms of active mobility are this unicorn, if you will, in the mobility world, because it's not just the access they deliver, it's the benefits they deliver as you're getting there that are important. And again, as an economist, we like looking at what that value is in monetary terms. And that value is huge. When we looked at the example of the oftentimes people say, well, if you provide more space for cycling or walking, cycling especially, you'll have see an increase in crashes, and you'll see the costs associated with those crashes going up. That may or may not be the case depending on how the system's designed. But when we looked at the monetized impacts of cycling in particular, we've seen that the benefits from active mobility, from the act of actually moving around, are 18 to 20 times greater than all the negative impacts of crashes that are both for fatalities and for serious injuries. So it really makes sense from a societal perspective that you have this unicorn, which is cycling and active mobility, that we facilitate more in our cities.
And we would, of course, completely agree in Cycling Without Age, because, of course, the ride is everything. We have one of our guiding principles is slowness, and it's because, why hurry if we're not really going anywhere? Because the ride itself is our objective.
I think with Cycling Without Age, there's an additional component to consider, and that's, of course, I'm looking behind you, Ole, and I can see that you've got the rider and the person pushing or pedaling and the person riding in your rickshaw behind there, like most of you have. Now, of course, the active mobility benefits can come to the person doing the pedaling, but the mobility benefits of being able to interact in a real environment, be stimulated by scent, by feeling, by sound, all of those cognitive benefits also income on the person that's being pushed. And I think that's the case for children, but it's also the case for older people as well. I think there's a real benefit in fully interacting with our environment from a cognitive perspective that we tend to overlook. And I think that as you go faster, and this you can see from the studies, your cognitive engagement with the environment is reduced. And when you're in an enclosed space, your cognitive engagement with the environment, closed space, like within a bus or a car, your cognitive engagement is reduced. And that simplification of the cognitive environment in which we move is also something that Cycling Without Age, but cycling also confers. And what I like about Cycling Without Age is you have the intersection of the two. You've got the health benefits for the person doing the heavy lifting, and you have the cognitive benefits and the mental health benefits for the person that's getting pushed. And you bring it together in one package. Going back to your question, why would cities be against this? It seems like a pretty...
I think we have the most beautiful quote there, Philippe, from you, that we're going to have to go back and type it out. So fantastic. So I want to move into the last section of this conversation. And, you gave a really inspired and powerful talk at the VeloCity conference in Dublin in 2019. And I think we'll share there's a video from that, and we'll share that with the audience after the conversation. And you gave a pointed critique of the classic dystopian images of the city of the future. And then you go on to paint your vision of the city of the future. And you mentioned 4 imperatives. And we already talked about the need for a city to be active. But then you also talk about the need for a city to be frictious. And I'm very curious about this imperative. What does it mean, and how does it become part of how did it become part of your vocabulary?
Actually, ironically, I made that up when I was in Copenhagen, when I was preparing for that speech. It's a way of describing. It's basically the observation that any and all growth occurs out of friction, not out of lack of barriers or lack of or ease of moving or addressing a barrier or overcoming a barrier. I think it was. I'm trying to remember the quote exactly. All that makes us stronger. All that. Well, it'll come back to me. It was a quote by.
I have it here.
Oh,
Not
yeah,
all that is easy is good, and that all
not
that
all that is
not
good
easy.
is easy.
Yeah.
That's from, I think, Cicero the Elder, one of the founders of the school of Stoic thought. But it's true. We as humans, from a molecular level to a muscular level to a cognitive level, only develop because we have to overcome friction. We have to overcome barriers. When you think of those moments in your life that you achieved the most, it probably wasn't because it was easy to do. It was probably because it was the most difficult thing you had to do and got beyond it. And cities are like that. Cities are engines for friction. You know, they are engines for this kind of multiple micro barriers, macro barriers. And it's by overcoming these that we create the serendipitous connections, the chaotic, somewhat serendipitous connections that make living in a community of other people really worthwhile. And so that notion of frictious, that notion that by I don't like this word, but by engineering or by including a certain amount of friction in your everyday life, that allows a city to function better. It allows people within the city to function better and allows us individually to grow. A city that provides that, I think, is a city that creates a stronger link among people and a stronger population. One of the visions around the kind of frictionless, I wouldn't even call it dystopian, but this vision that the future will have no barriers and will be just easy living for everyone, ignores that. And that kind of environment where everything becomes easy, everything becomes almost spoon-fed, doesn't create the kind of growth that individuals need in order to move forward. And so, and I think for those of you who walk a lot or every day, and for those of you who have inscribed in your mind and in your muscles the notion of what a hill is or what a 5-kilometer walk is, you understand that there is a time when you have to actually expend yourself physically to get through things and get over things. And I think cycling builds that, or any kind of active mobility builds that into the structure of the city in a way that it naturally allows people to grow. It naturally allows people to overcome this everyday friction in small doses, because you don't want it to be, a wall either. You just want to have this kind of little nudges that, okay, I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to get over this small rise and go over this hill, and then I can go down on the other side. And that's the kind of friction that works to, again, as I said, on a molecular level, on a muscular level, and a cognitive level, allows us to develop.
It was actually Ernest Hemingway that said it is by riding the bicycle that you can learn the contours of a country best, since you have to sweat up the hills and coast down them.
It is. Now, I walk a lot, I cycle a lot, but I feel that both of those ways of getting around have enabled me new and fundamentally deep insights into not only the environment, the context in which I live, but around other people as well. And I think it also helps me observe better, not just my environment, but other people as well. And the last thing is it creates this physicality in the closeness. It's not always closeness, but the physicality that you have in engaging with other people in your city. You're going to brush near them. You're going to see them. You'll stop next to them. You'll hear them. You'll smell them sometimes. But all of that is important because they're all signals that you're not alone. You're in this with a lot of other people. And somewhere that builds both an awareness, hopefully a little bit of empathy as well for other people in our cities.
And actually, it ties well in with the third imperative that you have, which is social. And this is, of course, an idea that resonates really well with all of us at Cycling Without Age. Why is it good for a city to be social?
It is Ole, you're asking me the question. It's like, why is a city good to be a city? That's what cities do. That's why we like cities. Cities have this enduring, cities and towns, it's not just megalopoli, but cities and towns are these constructs that allow us to come into contact with each other, close contact sometimes, certainly in communion with others, in order to create new ideas, to get access to new opportunities, to work as well, to consume together. All of that social element is the city rather is the hard imprint of what we need as humans in terms of social activity. And the only way in which our species has been able to advance is because we've been able to develop these nexi rather, of areas where we can all be together. Now, I think sometimes when we think, going back to the question you had about, how do we think about the future? Sometimes when we think about cities, all of that social element can be extremely gratifying. It can also be quite messy at times, because you're confronted with other views of how life and society should be, and other ways of living. But again, I don't think segregation is the answer. I think the friction from bringing together these views, the social mixing of people, of views, of societies, of cultures, is what helps us grow. When you hear people talk about what is the city, I said, to you, Ole, cities are these machines, or not machines, are these organic nest of social life. For many people who view the future as technology driven, view cities as machines for living. And that is completely opposite to that view, because what you see is this kind of oversimplification of what a city is, down to processes that can be rendered more efficient. And there is no city in history that has become great by only becoming more efficient. In fact, the greatest cities have seen some increases in efficiency, but probably a lot more the increases in the random messiness that made them attractive for people to go to in the first place. And you think of New York, you think of London.
But the paradox, of course, is that city planners have for decades have been working to exactly make the cities not active, not social, and non-frictious. So
not all of them.
No, that's right.
We have some great visionaries, Jane Jacob being one, and an entire school of thought around observing how cities actually function. Jan Gale and the colleagues at your neighbors up in Copenhagen, Heleli Soholt, and all, looking at the ways in which we can see cities to be functioning. I think those are important. But yeah, you're right. That's in French we say une déformation professionnelle, professional deformity, that when you have engineers looking at systems, when you have people who are trained to optimize systems, look at systems, they seek to optimize them or engineer them. But you have other people, sociologists, anthropologists, who try to understand and create cities that foster what seems to work in the real world. And there's always this tension. The problem is, on one side, the technology and the machines are the answer, and that's something you can make a lot of money from. On the other side, you've got social interactions, neighborhood building, all these elements that don't really have markets, but have tremendous importance for citizens. And you have this kind of misalignment between, who's going to be speaking for one view or the other, which, again, coming full circle back to how this group can help, is by putting out in the public that vision of how cities can best function, by opposing this sort of technology-led vision with a human-led vision, a vision that builds on the social contract and the social links that can be developed, is simply by taking someone out for a bicycle ride on a sunny day, or even on a rainy day. And it's an important role to play, because on the other hand, like I said earlier, you've got the lobbyists or the other activists who are activating or lobbying for a very different vision of the city and a very different vision for society. And we shouldn't throw our hands in and say, okay, we have no place saying that that's the wrong model, or that we're not going to act against that. But again, I really do believe that by the simple vehicle literal vehicle that many of you use, you are providing a counterexample to what is important in that city and what is important in our lives.
Yeah, and actually, before we move on to I have one final question for you, Philippe. I sometimes do this little exercise with if I have a group of residents in a care home. I ask them to go on a time travel with me, and we go into this imaginary time machine, and we travel back to the day when they got their first bicycle, and then they kind of had to imagine they get up on that little bicycle and they ride off, and they have to imagine they ride off into the into the forest on the path. Maybe there's with some friends, and they kind of ride without hands on the handlebar, and then I ask them to imagine so that the emotion they have, what they feel like when they are on that bike, going down that forest path. And then when we come back, we talk about the first words, the first feelings that spring to mind. And I'd say it's probably about 6 or 7 out of 10 who say the word freedom. That's what they feel when they are on that bike. And of course, when you lose the ability to ride your bike, then you lose your freedom as well. And I'm just telling that little anecdote because your last imperative for a city of the future is free. And does that mean that cities of today are not free, or are they restricted or locked up? Or how can we all make our contribution to make our cities freer?
So there's 2 things I want to say. And the first is by way of anecdote. I'm going to tell you my first bike story.
Yes.
Again, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, at the end of a cul-de-sac road on top of a hill that was in the middle of a forest. Typical 1970s American low-density development. The only place I could ride the bicycle that I was given by my grandfather was just in the driveway in front of our house. And very quickly, I loved riding the bicycle, but riding in a small 20 square meter driveway was not fully satisfying. So one day, when no one was looking, and I must have been, I want to say 7 or 8, I took the bicycle and I rode it out of my driveway, up the hill, past the mailboxes at the top of the hill, down the hill. It's about a 1/4 mile driveway through the forest, literally barely not going off into the ditch and the ravine on the side because I didn't quite understand how to use coaster brakes. This was a back pedal coaster brake. And I got onto the road, the rolling fork drive, and I made it a mile down the road. And this is a road that the only time I'd ever gone on this road had been in a car. And I felt like this is it. I can ride to Canada, I can ride to Mexico, I can ride to Patagonia. There's nothing that's going to stop me. But I realized, okay, maybe I should turn back because I hadn't told my parents, I hadn't told anyone that I was, and actually I had been told never to go, to do what I'm doing just then. And so I turned around and started going back. And up till now, I hadn't seen a single car. And on the way back, I do see a car. And okay, in my young mind, I knew that I should probably move to the side of the road. And I got a little freaked out because car is a big thing. And I hadn't seen it from that perspective before on a bicycle on the road. And so I go off into the ditch, down the ditch. And this is one of these 1970s Stingray, I don't know if you see these kind of easy rider bikes with the kind of ribbons coming out of this, not ribbons, but little decorations coming out of the handlebars. And so I go down into the bottom of the ditch, and it has a chrome fender, and the chrome fender just ripped open my lip. And I'm spurting blood. And I'm thinking, well, this is going to be a hard thing to explain to my parents when I get back. And so I get back to not my parents, at the end of the road. Before I go up the hill, there was a friend's house, and I get there and I knock on the door, and his mother opens the door, and here I am with my bicycle, blood pouring down my face. And I tell her, don't tell my parents, but do you have a Band-Aid? And so she got me fixed up. Of course, she told my parents. They came and picked me up. And even though I got a real severe dressing down, when I went to bed that night, despite the pain, despite having not been grounded, but really reprimanded strongly by my parents, the one thing that was in my mind is, I can't wait to do this again. I cannot wait to go further next time. And so
And you
that's
did.
and I did. So that was like my inception for it. But the point I wanted to make there is it was the freedom. It was not only the freedom, but the autonomy, being able to move yourself in a way that only you determined, what you did, including, crashing. And so that was an important lesson. When I say the bicycle makes us free, it is because that autonomy. It is a vehicle, it's a tool that you can pick up and use when you want to, wherever you want to, hopefully in as safe conditions as possible, because the city has been designed for that, as it is in many places, but not everywhere, far from it. And it provides a way for you to divert from your trajectory, divert from your plans as you see fit. You see a side road, you take it, all right, you go down it. You explore a neighborhood. How many times? The same is true for walking. The difference between cycling and walking is, of course, cycling you can do more in the amount of time, but it's the same as walking around the neighborhood and discovering a path or a road that you hadn't anticipated or hadn't known going behind the building. Cycling provides that kind of freedom in setting life choices. And even more importantly, I think, and this is going back to that inception story, if you will, it imprints on you that that is normal, that life should be set up so that you can make this exploration in real time. That's a lot harder to do with a car. That's a lot harder to do with the train system. That's a lot harder to do with all kinds of transport modes, which require a greater investment in capital, a greater investment in the type of vehicles and infrastructure that limit your choices rather than expand your choices. So walking and cycling allow you to expand your choices. And that is a kind of freedom that I think we respond quite well to.
Wow. Well, on that note, Philippe, thank you so much. This conversation has been an absolute eye-opener, and I think it's also expanded our toolbox for making better lives.
Well,
do you have any final words for us?
There is, we talked, or maybe I talked about COVID at the beginning, and there is something not just to take away from the way in which COVID is changing our cities. There is something that I take away from the way in which this pandemic is changing us as people, and why what you do is really important in that respect. And what that is especially for those people who are able and fortunate enough to be able to work remotely, and have not had to suffer the kind of economic duress because their in-presence requirements meant that they lost their jobs. But for those who work remotely, we have seen this sort of compression of everyday life into these long phases of uninterrupted engagement with screens, engagement with our work. And when you're in a normal workplace, you have these everyday sort of natural breaks that are built into your cycle. Even if you're getting up to go to the bathroom, if you're going to see colleagues, if a colleague comes in and talks to you, if you go down the hallway to the printer, whatever, your day is sort of has this punctuation, this natural pauses. That's important because our brains need that kind of cyclical pausing to actually process what's happening to us. And I think for many people, not everyone, but for many people during COVID, we've had this sort of bunching together, this long, unpunctuated day that makes it difficult for us to process what's happening. When I tell colleagues, I think it's a bit like if you had to read a book with zero punctuation. You don't have that ability to make sense of what you're reading, and the reduced pauses, the natural rhythm of our day means that we are having a harder time to make sense with what's happening to us today. Getting outside, cycling, walking, being exposed to the elements, being exposed to the wind, being exposed to the sensory and cognitive loading that we need provides that punctuation. And so especially now, it becomes even more important, even from not from just a physical perspective, like I said, but that cognitive perspective, that physical activity, and not just that, but being brought to the outdoors helps us deal with this new reality where we are having a hard time processing what's happening to us because of the way in which our days are becoming organized. And I think that's, again, really important for what Cycling Without Age does, because it provides that from two sides. For those that are that are doing the pedaling and for those that are sitting in front and having the environment brought to them. That kind of engagement with the environment is especially important now because of COVID-19 and because of the way in which many of our days have become. So it's a multi
of encouragement and a really good perspective, Philippe. So I'd like to thank you very much for taking your time off on a beautiful sunny Saturday. I can see the sun is shining outside of Paris, and
a little bit.
And thank you to all of you for joining today. And have a wonderful day. If you're in North America, you have it all ahead of you. If you're in Asia, then it's all over. And I'd like to say good night. And we'll be back with more CWA conversations in the near future. And if you have any ideas for topics and guests, I would love to hear from you. So thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Arigatou gozaimasu from Tokyo. Ciao.